Welcome to Empowered Teams podcast. We're discussing how diversity empowers your teams, not just around International Women's Day or Black History Month, but adding a diversity of thought, experiences, and skill sets that will increase your creativity, your innovation, and engagement. And absolutely, it's critical within some functional teams, such as those building data products, to reduce that bias. So, great leadership isn't just about surrounding yourself in a personal echo chamber. It's effective teams will feel safe to contribute their views and challenge business as usual. Today, we've got an all female cast. I'm Krista Swain, Marketing Director at Eden Smith, and I'll invite the team to introduce themselves. So, over to you, Jane.
Morning. Hi. So I'm Jane Smith. I'm head of executive search at Eden Smith.
I'm Orly. I'm a second year student at the University of St. Andrews, and I have a part-time job with the Entrepreneurship Centre of the university. Over to you, Rachel.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Rachel. This will be my voice that you're hearing. And yeah, I am part of the recruitment team at Eden Smith. So yeah, recruiting data professionals into data teams, typically day to day.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us all. Um, so if we accept that we're all born without bias, we don't see colour, we don't see age, and we don't see gender, where does that start?
I would
I
think
think it's
like just as you're growing up, just learning about the world and getting introduced to different things, and everything has a label. Um, Even when we don't want things to have a label, it still has a label. So you're just constantly guessing what's what.
Yeah, I mean, I I've kind of always worked. My husband was the stay-at-home dad. When we got married, he took on my family name as opposed to the other way round. So in every way, we would role reversal. And my three children grew up around this. They were just like, obviously, they grew up with me. And so they'd seen this all play out, and it was their normal. And I remember one of them coming home from school one day and going, "Yeah, but dad earns more money than you." And I'm like, "Does
wow.
he? He's a stay-at-home dad. He doesn't even have a job. So where does he get this money from that's so much more than I bring in from my job that I like rush home from just so I can put you guys to bed?" And they were just like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, but he just does, doesn't he?" And it's just like, I was
Why
just
did they
shocked.
think that?
Was that a conversation that they had in school with their friends, probably?
I mean,
Yeah.
it must have been because within our family, within their social experiences, within
Mm,
I of that community, it was nothing that they'd ever learned. And then obviously the wider community and the wider messaging, whether that's from TV, whether that's from school,
Mm.
friends, whatever
yeah.
society, has that kind of impression that it's a man's world and the man's in charge. But yeah, that shocked me to my core, and it took me quite a
Yeah.
while to like take off being offended, have the conversation and try and educate.
I think you definitely learn sort of the stereotypes from a young age, or I think it's better now, but at least when I was younger, for context, I was born in 1996, so very much growing up in like the 2000s, and it was
Mm,
still a lot of just stereotypes in media, adverts that you saw on the telly, films, all of that. Whereas I think we see a lot more diversity now, and it's sort of unlearning that behavior and being more representative, even with series like Modern Family and blended families and things like that. But definitely when I
yeah.
was younger, it was still very stereotypical.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. I think it's the traits as well. When we typically think about, I suppose, kind of the male traits, as you go into the workforce and come out of, obviously education, there's still, I suppose, kind of the male kind of traits we still associate with being, assertive, ambitious, having that competitive streak, which in the past and it's still very kind of relevant to today. And I suppose the more feminine traits are more kind of around kind of being collaborative, being the peacemaker, that kind of thing. So um, I suppose like women, are seen more so as being kind of bossy, aggressive, bullish, that kind of thing. If they do show that assertiveness. And I think that is something which we've, almost been grown up to accept. So,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
And to go back to
definitely.
what you were saying, Krista, as well, like I think like no matter how you're brought up within your family to think that those traits are not either masculine or feminine, like I definitely feel that my experience in the educational system undid whatever good my parents tried to do in um showing me that those traits were something positive. And like I think that especially how unforgiving the French educational system is, I think that this idea that women have to adapt, whereas men are forgiven of their ways that they don't adapt, is just sort of something that no, like hasn't, I don't think even changed today. That seems to have like
yeah,
stayed as a bias.
yeah,
Yeah, and there's that element of, like, I was always told, or it was a thing that yeah, we were kind of ingrained in us, was that girls mature faster than boys. I always heard that when I was growing up. It's girls mature faster than boys. But now I
yeah,
think, do we, or do we just have to? Because as you said, like, boys are more forgiven, and it's boys will be boys, and they're kind of allowed more of a
yeah.
childhood, while we sort of have to take on more responsibility and accountability for our behaviors. And yeah,
Mm.
I feel like sometimes it's more, do we just have to grow up a bit quicker?
I
Yeah.
think because boys always get that like, oh, he's a cheeky one.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. Or
it's
even
We
like
can all
that.
mental.
picture that person in our head where it's just sort of like you've seen that dad
Yeah.
going, oh, great, good on you, lad.
Yeah. It's the same if you think about like in a playground and you see kind of two of the two boys kind of fighting, or they're just play fighting. But I think it would be, it's almost, 'cause I've just seen my own kids, in the playground, and seeing, my son, play fighting, as he's grown up with his mates, and it's just kind of brushed off. But to see my daughter doing that, I think in the playground in primary school, it's almost still frowned upon now, which seems crazy
Mm.
in this day and age, I think.
Or even like the the cliche of like the guys like in like elementary school or whatever, like pulling the girl's braids, and it's like, oh, but it's because he likes you and like stuff like that. I think it still goes into like sort of the same thing of like, yeah.
No, it's because he's
It's
being mean.
excuses, isn't it? Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. So it just all comes in like that traditional behavior, and how do we change those? And I think we've already touched on this aspect of media playing a huge um and the impact of sort of like that day-to-day kind of passive acceptance of what being thrown down the TV channel. But we've really got to
Yeah.
think about how we create that change. And obviously we've got
Mm.
International Women's Day approaching, and I can't remember a time when it's been mentioned when a man hasn't. When's International Man's Day? It's just like, the point we have equality, you can have your space. Right now, let's have one day where we
Mm.
can
Yeah,
raise profile and go, we've still got a gender gap. We
yeah.
still have to kind of fight to get those pay rises and get those promotions that we're
Mhm, mhm.
working for. You know,
Yeah,
the world is not set up for women and our traditional skill sets and attributes to just get that reward. It's
yeah.
got to be fought
There's
for and what have you.
yeah, there's also still that, I think, stigma around kind of women returning to work after maternity. So when you're talking about kind of the pay gap, I think between kind of men and women, I think when women come back, it's still kind of that stigma around whether they're capable, of juggling kind of family and work life. And it can become kind of more difficult, I think, for women to advance when they are mums. And this is something we've talked about kind of in the past. But sometimes in some cases, I think kind of employers may question a woman's ability kind of to
Mm.
meet the demands. Not in all cases. We are seeing changes, which is good. But it is still a thing out
I'd
It's
say there's almost,
interesting.
sorry, Rachel, that there's almost an acceptance that women who our mothers can do it because people know that we're going to
Mm.
fight to do it.
Yeah.
And I think there's almost that risk for us to, I
Yeah.
mean, I've got 3 kids, to overcompensate, to prove that you can do it all,
Yeah.
and to feel that you can never put your children or your family first because that will
Mm.
be seen as a negative. So I
Mm.
think mindsets have changed, but we
Yeah.
as women need to change our mindsets as
Yeah.
well and kind of be more forgiving on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think to
I
be honest, I think you're right.
I was going to say it's interesting as well because we're now at a time where typically, if you look at I guess a traditional or stereotypical man-woman relationship family, um, both parties these days work. Obviously, back when it was like the 50s, it was, sort of men went to work and the women did all the housework and like did all of that background work that allowed them to go and work for 8 hours a day and, manage a house and have that sort of, as a team.
Mm.
But now, where both parties are working, why is it that maybe women are questioned a bit more when they're coming back from maternity leave and a man isn't? Because typically they should be sharing all of their kind of workloads. If they're both working, they should be sharing housework, childcare. But it shows that that probably still isn't the case. A lot of it is still falling on the woman, even though that she's working as well. And maybe that's why there's still that questioning around the capability of coming back into the workplace for her, but not for the man, if that makes sense.
It's really
Mm.
interesting because during COVID, obviously, no kids were at school.
Mm.
Who were the one that sacrificed their careers? Typically, it was
Mm.
the women. So we actually saw an increase in gender gap during COVID because it was
Yeah.
the women who were sacrificing their role for the man to continue doing theirs. And it's just like,
Mm.
we're
Yeah.
still there.
Yeah.
And is it a case of we know that there are more men in leadership opportunities, so maybe they are a higher earning parent in the family, so then that's why the woman is sacrificing her career, or how much is it on that aspect versus, I guess, just falling
Mm.
into stereotypical gender roles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all kind of linked.
And I think just there was some stats I was looking at kind of recently, and only 19% apparently of senior VPs and 15% of CEOs are women. So there is still this big gap, I
Mm.
think, especially at that kind of leadership kind of stage in life. And just having a look, I mean, also saw that kind of 39% of women in the tech space kind of see kind of gender bias has been a hindrance to getting a promotion as well. So there is still that mindset. We need to think about how we're going to change that. How we're going to, just move forward in terms of just making sure even our boards and, at that leadership level, that we are as diverse as we can be.
Okay,
So
so
I
let me
remember.
challenge you on this. Obviously, we want equality. We want to have fairness, parity, and all that. But
yeah.
why? Why should organizations, hiring managers, leaders in teams, why should they have equitable teams? Why do we need diverse teams?
Well, I can start on this. I think if it's a case of, for example, if you're a company that builds and sells products, any kind of products, typically you're selling that to as many people as possible. You're going to be selling it to both men and women. So you need to be able to design a product that works for everyone. It you can't ignore half of the population. And there's a case of
Mm.
this with iPhones, for example. It's in the book Invisible Women, if anyone's read that. iPhones are built to fit a male hand, and they're like too big
Didn't know
typically
that.
and heavy for female hands. I have the
Wow.
iPhone Mini because it fits so much better in my
Literally
hand.
same.
Have the Mini. It actually works out a little bit because it's cheaper.
Yeah,
um,
no, literally.
but if you have an all male team, they're not thinking about, maybe they are, but probably not,
Mm.
not thinking about how half of the population is going to experience that product. It's not going to be in the same way.
Yeah. I totally
Yeah.
agree. And even just like different, it creates different dynamics. Like like
Yeah.
having all those different combinations, having both men and women working together, having just men working together and having just women work together at different instances within the same overall group. It allows for all these
Mm.
different dynamics to come up with like ideas and solutions and like
Yeah.
yeah, that you couldn't have if you only had one combination of people. It just unlocks new
Mm.
conversations.
Yeah.
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 And you're likely to really kind of build and attract kind of I think a happy, high performing team if you've got a good mixture, and a real kind of diverse team. And in the end, that's only going to be a positive thing for your business. So
Mhm.
it's really important, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, it's
It
like I said at the
it's
top,
only
it's that echo chamber, isn't it? If you've got a team of people around you who look like you, who act like you, who think like you're only
Yeah.
going one direction, aren't you?
Yeah.
yeah.
And is that the right direction? So what you need is
Mm.
someone to go, well, my life and my experiences and my
Yeah.
considerations have brought me here, and I'm going to challenge what you're saying
Mm.
Yeah.
aggressively, fully,
Yeah.
and we're going to add more creativity and innovation
Yeah.
and come up with better solutions rather than
Mm.
that old business as usual thinking. We've got to change
Yeah.
that.
So I was going to
Celebrating
say
uniqueness, isn't it,
it's only
really?
going to
And
add
kind of,
it's only going to add to the team. It's never by having lots of, different people from different backgrounds, different perspectives within your team, it's never going to take away from anything. It's only going to add.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so interesting that you say that actually because like I had so I'm an intern currently at my job and just recently my job hired a new intern and a portion of me had anxiety because I was like I'm gonna have to like we're both gonna be sharing the same position, like I'm gonna have to adapt to this. I'm gonna have to, prove that like this role, like I deserve it. I'm gonna have to overcompensate and like negotiate this space that like oh I've just had alone for the last couple of months and now I'm gonna have to share it. And then
Yeah.
I think and especially when it's between women, it's like this need of like there's a limited amount of space. And so this like almost instinct of like I need to protect this. And then having to fight that and realize no, like actually if we work together and like we'll both do better, like we'll both be like more competent and do more and have an easier job than if we're each in our corner trying to prove the higher
Mm.
ups sort of
Yeah.
That's the
mentality.
You
collaboration,
bounce
right?
off each other.
Yeah,
Yeah, you bounce off each other, right?
yeah. But
Really
I
important.
think there is an instinct of like, oh, I've gotten this space that's rare, especially for me doing English and film, doing like entrepreneurship. I'm like, what am I necessarily doing here with my background? You're like, oh, I have to protect this like at first before realizing that like, no, you can use the resources around you to do better, I think. I don't know.
I think at
Mm.
the moment we're in a state in the world where we just bounce from one crisis to another. Things are always changing.
Yeah.
Everything's moving at such a pace, and we just have to transform how we work,
Yeah.
how we behave. Um, and we can only do that through collaboration rather than competing. Um, and I think that goes within teams, across the different functions of the business, but also across the industry. And if we think now, data moves at such a pace, sustainability has got so much regulation that's coming in. And if you just try to do that by yourself, you're going to really struggle. You
Yeah.
need, as a sustainability expert, you need data to be able to demonstrate your carbon footprint. And you need to
Mm.
be able to demonstrate it with data that's verifiable, that's repeatable. Um,
Yeah.
and you have to work cross functionally. We can no longer just go, this is what my department's doing. I'm in my track and I don't need to veer off. So having those skills of collaboration and adaptability, having that creative mindset, being
Mm.
agile, being responsive are so vital to how we move
Yeah.
forward as individual professionals, but also
Mm.
as professionals within that teamscape.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. But do we encourage, like, at an education level, do we encourage, like, group work to actually be communal, like, to actually be cooperative? like because I like the word teamwork is thrown around so much in education and group works, teamworks, but then within the group work and the way that that's assessed, is that necessarily assessed on how much like how well you are cooperated and supported each other as a team, or is it what your final product you came out with? Like, I just think that
Mm,
that affects so much how then you think about how you work as a team in like a corporate space.
Yeah.
yeah,
We're assessed on your individual contribution to the group work. I mean, I remember when I
easy.
was at university, albeit quite a long time ago, everything that we did within the marketing side of it was group work. And some groups, you'd have someone who was like, I'm just sorry, I'm just going to the pub, just sorry.
Mm.
Didn't meet you in the library that day. Sorry, sorry, sorry. And you just always got assessed on your
Yeah.
individual contribution to it. So it doesn't encourage you to go, oh, come on, I've now
Mm.
got to think about how I can manage you. It's just like, oh, we'll just get on and do it ourselves. Um,
Seen from The Apprentice, doesn't it, really? When you're working in groups, there's always a couple in there, isn't there, that you think,
they
"What are you
throw under the
doing?"
bus as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we have that culture where it's just sort of like, if I throw someone else under the
Right.
bus, I'm going to
Yeah.
shine. Sorry about that.
Oh, easy watching.
So,
Yeah.
so is it getting better? We've done a lot of, and I'm going to use the really female derogative word of moaning. We've moaned about where it's wrong. We've talked about why it should be different, but is it changing?
I have seen, it was last week actually, I saw a stat around there being, for the first time, more women in law firms than men.
Wow.
Trying to
Oh.
find where exactly it was. So the proportion of women in law firms has risen from 48% in 2015 to 53% in 2023. So I think it was in terms of at university and studying law and stuff that had increased to be more female heavy a couple of years ago. And obviously now that's transpiring into the actual workplace as people have graduated and got their jobs. And I mean, there's still more men at partner level and at the leadership level, but yeah, it's the first
Why
time
that
ever.
is,
And now it's a
because,
higher proportion.
yeah, because if you think about, if I was to describe a lawyer, it's
Mm.
it's very male dominated. I mean, I that shocks me because I still view it as a male dominated word. But is that view of
Mm.
someone having to be quite aggressive
Yeah.
and non-emotional in order to execute that job well? So I wonder why that transition's coming, because it feels like such a male territory.
What it made
Yeah.
me think of is Legally Blonde.
Yes, I was about to say
Obviously,
that.
yeah, so that came out, it must have been early 2000s when that came out. So it's the right kind of, generation of everyone who kind of grew up with that film or that era
Yeah.
of movies.
Wow.
And sort of
But look,
seeing,
if
this
that's true.
sort of this Barbie girl in the, going to Harvard Law School surrounded by everyone, in their brown, boring suits and like mostly guys and telling her that she can't do it and she does. And it also I think just I reckon it probably has had an effect
No,
on girls thinking
definitely.
I can do that too. And there was one of the stats I saw as well, was I saw this one this morning. Male actors spend 100% more time on screen in films than females do. 100% more time on screen.
Wow.
And it just shows though how I think there has been more focus in recent years of female leads and
Mhm.
having more of an equal screen time between them. But if Legally Blonde has influenced the law practice where it's now more females than men, it shows the power of representation in
Yeah.
the media again,
Yeah.
trickling down into our
Mm.
actual lives.
And I think
It's
even in conversations like on social media, like really very recently, I've seen a lot of women who are now like have graduated and like are working in law talk about the influence that legally blonde has on them. And there's actually I think a law
Mm,
firm where they only wear pink suits like
Oh,
as
I've
like
heard
a
wow.
that.
rule and stuff. And I've just been seeing this trending. And yeah, I think there's way more like a need to like own
Yeah.
these sorts of cliches, I think. But
Well,
Mhm.
Disney's been slammed for it so many times, hasn't it? Sort of like the Disney princess. And then they brought
Yeah.
out Frozen in order to subvert this, like the stereotypical, the archetype, challenge the stereotypes. And I used to teach film, and I did it as a unit with some Year 9 students. And we watched it all, and it's just like you get to this end, and I'm like, who's the hero? And they're like, oh, it's Christoph. It's just like,
So still
okay,
lots of work to do.
was Christoph in that scene? No, he wasn't. It's just like, how did Christoph save the day? And they didn't really have
Mm.
the answer, but it was that expectation of course, it's the man. But it took, I think I had to literally spell it out. And then they're like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Did they just not pay attention to the film?
Yeah, maybe. I loved it. Loved the film. It was sort of like I was a bit like, "Can I get away with this Year 9 boys? Are they gonna watch Frozen?" And
Mm.
I used to like go past my classroom singing "Let It Go."
It was also when they wanna highlight the main relationship in that film is between the sisters rather than it being, you
Yeah.
know, prince and princess, and kind of just took the focus away from that and importance of other relationships.
It
Yeah.
shows the demonstration of how much we need to repeat that message
Yeah.
Yeah.
because you got that. My Year 9s didn't get that.
Yeah, and some
You think
full-grown
when
men
it
don't
goes
get that.
No,
Yeah, I mean,
no.
it goes back to it needs to happen in education, right?
Yeah,
Because it's like if we can really, just talk about the stereotypes and the stereotypical kind of characters in these type of films, and catch the kids as they're younger. It's like my youngest, she's still only 8, and she loves Moana. And Moana again is seen as the hero, within
Mm,
that film, and she absolutely loves that. She is quite sassy pants, but again,
yeah.
that's a word I suppose we associate with, you know, with girls and the
Yeah.
bossiness again. So,
yeah.
My,
a bit.
Yeah.
my favourite Disney film was always Mulan. And again, I think it's based on a true story as well, which makes it even better.
Yeah.
But again, it was, this girl who went off to war for her father
Yeah.
and absolutely
Yeah.
tore everyone up and was amazing. And that was my favourite one. I didn't care about, the
Exaggeration in the truth there, but there was
Ariel and
certainly
yeah.
a Mulan and a John Smith.
But there's definitely, like there's been a lot of conversations about Disney movies and, like, the roles of women in, like, the workplace and stuff. Because I think about the,
Mm,
new Snow White with Rachel Ziegler, and, like, there was so much hate that went towards her when in one of the interviews she talked about how, they kind of rewrote Snow White in this adaptation so that it's not all about romance and all about love, and everyone was like, "Well, why can't it be about love? Why is
mm,
that not a valid um motivation for a female lead to have? Why does it have to always be girl boss or whatever?" But then it turned
mm.
into the other extreme where she got so much hate and so much criticism about everything surrounding her personality, her identity, her work,
Wow.
because of that comment. Whereas, like, I feel like both, why can't we just have like a nuanced conversation about this where it's like
Mm, yeah,
it needs to be all one or all the other.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's just having those opportunities, isn't it? And it goes back to, having those choices. If you want to, obviously go down the route of, leadership, or, just giving people the opportunity of, if you want to be a stay-at-home, parent or a homemaker, it's just there's no right or wrong, and this goes for male and female, on
Yeah.
both sides, I think, of the coin. Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't you have that choice? It's
Yeah.
something
But
to
even
discuss, I
I
think.
as
agree.
a grown woman who's had a good career, professional career, different careers over my life and had evidence of success within those, when I
Mm,
played Sea Change for the first time, um, which has got all about the soft skills, data fluency, and I played it alongside CDOs. These
yeah.
CDOs were all male, and I was coming in as marketing. I'm not data led, and a female. I was just like, oh, this is going to be hideous. And I had that kind of imposter system,
Yeah,
self-doubt, and I was like, "There's no way I'm gonna be able to play this game and challenge a CDO on anything." And
yeah,
yet I got into the space, you get into your character. I think we've all realised I can be quite vocal, and I was just like, "No, this, I think we should do this." And it's
yeah,
I don't know, it was an interesting reflection for me to kind of go through that
Yeah.
journey of self-doubt and fear, because I was
yeah,
going to train with this group of men,
yeah,
who were in a different position to me, and then really rewarding, because I think, the coach gave me some positive feedback at one point, which I just lapped
Mm.
up. Um, but it was just sort of like, "Oh, no, I can do it," and we need those affirmations as well, but people need to see us in these situations and see
Yeah.
how our
yeah,
skills really come into play within a team,
mm,
and I think that
And
really
it's
yeah,
like
comes
the
down to attracting the right team members as well, and
mm,
mm,
thinking about the different segments of our community and how we can
mm,
connect to them with the simple things such as job descriptions and, Jane,
yeah,
Rach, that's your specialist areas.
mm.
Um, so what can people do? Give some as advice as we approach the end of our half hour.
You want to go,
well, I
Rach?
mean, yeah, of course. With job descriptions, there's actually quite a lot of stuff you can do. This
Mm,
I have another stat, and this one always sticks in my head because I also think it just makes so much sense. Like as a woman, I'm sure we'll probably all really relate. But it's typically women won't apply for a role unless they feel they meet 100% of the criteria on there,
I saw
and men
that.
apply when they meet about
Mm,
60%. So that is if you're trying to attract, a more diverse team, your job description or job advert can already be sort of putting people off. So
mm,
kind of steps you can take to mediate for it is simply differentiating between what's actually essential and what's just like a nice to have. Rather than sort of having it all in one list, it sort of assumes that everything there is a must have when in most cases it's not.
yeah,
I've actually seen job adverts now also just clarifying and saying, please still apply, even if you may not meet all of the criteria, because, we value X, Y, and Z. It's not the be all end all kind of thing, and just provides a bit more reassurance
yeah,
of apply anyway.
mm,
And there's gender decoders as well online where you can kind of pass through a job description and it changes it so it uses more gender neutral language, like replaces there's masculine coded words. You can replace them with more gender neutral ones. Um,
mm,
yeah, there's quite a lot. Salaries as well being on the job description can increase um, your diverse candidate applications as well. I
mm.
saw 80% of diverse candidates are less likely to apply for a role if it doesn't have the salary on there.
Wow.
And that could come into as well women feeling not so confident negotiating salaries and things like that. So it's of course easier when you can see the range that's sort of on offer
Mm,
already. Um, so yeah,
that's a
there's lots people could be doing that's putting people off without them realizing.
yeah. I think also, I mean, if you think about kind of widening your search to include kind of diverse
Yeah,
groups, so thinking about where you're putting your adverts out, how are you reaching out to these diverse groups? Thinking about your network, making sure when you, get to the shortlist stage and you're sending your kind of your shortlist to a client, just making sure that, that shortlist is as diverse as you can make it, I think is hugely important. Are you
yeah,
being kind of mindful about kind of different groups in terms of, as it goes back to what you say, Rachel, in terms of putting them off, sending their CV through. Think about maybe even, when it's a business owner or, if you're recruiting into your team, think about maybe taking off those personal details on a CV. Because automatically, if you see, I don't know, a Jane Smith on a CV, obviously it's going to be, a woman, or if you see a Simon Clark, obviously it's going to be a man. Or thinking about, just how you're going to, be able to attract as much diverse talent as possible. I think it's hugely important. So there's lots of different things I think, teams can do to ensure they're reaching as big kind of market as they can.
Yeah,
Mm.
and it's
And I
it's
think
interesting hearing the job description thing. I feel like it was just yesterday when I was applying to the job I have now, and I went through the exact like same things that you were describing, where I was like, is this for me? This is gonna be like, is this all gonna be for, dude bros who are doing econ? Like, is this who they're sort of looking for? And I'm, doing English and film, and like
Mm,
I didn't know if like I had to really push myself to apply and to like believe that like I deserved a spot in that space. And I'm so glad that I did. And you
mm,
actually see once you're in that space that they're looking for more people that are not what you think is
Mm.
traditionally who would be in that space. And because that brings so much
mm,
more
yeah.
creativity to what you can do for the business.
and from a
Finding
marketing
those unicorns as
perspective,
well, which is what we've talked about quite a bit, isn't it, really? You know,
yeah.
outside of a job spec.
Yeah. And from a marketing perspective, it's really about creating a space that's equitable, that people feel talks to the audience, but the communities, all the
Yeah,
communities. So your brand's really got to be that inclusive. That's not just about hiring talent, but it's also about building up your community and your brand within your space. Um, Tokenism is just like so easy to spot. I think it's
yeah,
not such a problem as it used to be, but it used to just be like, oh, it's cringy.
yeah.
But if we're consistently conscious and
Mm,
consistent about our consideration, whether that's making job adverts, whether that's your website and your communication, thinking about the images,
yeah,
the language, font, the tone, the colours, the layout. I mean, that goes for
mm,
disabilities, colour blindness.
yeah,
Mm.
It's one of the least things that we think about is kind of like thinking that what if someone can't see blue? How's that going to
yeah,
look to them? We've really got to kind of open up our minds and make sure that
mm,
we are being as inclusive as we
yeah,
can be, so that
mm,
we encourage diversity within our space as well.
Mm.
Because if
yeah,
you don't show yourself as that welcoming space, you're not going
mm,
to grow as a diverse, you're not going to attract a diverse candidate because they can't see themselves fit within your team.
mm,
Um, so
There was something that I was noticing throughout the podcast actually. It was only a few times, but and I did it myself, is I kind of said a point and I finished it with, if that makes sense. And already I think you finished something with, I don't know. And I think that's just something that we do as well. Like us with women, we're not as confident giving our opinions and, just speaking our minds, talking about our experiences and
mm,
stuff. We caveat everything we say sort of at the end with, if you understand, if it makes sense, I don't know. And it's maybe just also for us ourselves to kind of, yeah, just have more confidence and kind of speak like a
mm,
man, and just not be afraid to say what you have to say and finish it on that. And
yeah,
if people disagree, they disagree.
mm.
That was my sort of final thought.
no,
And that goes back to like the imposter syndrome that Krista was
Mm,
talking about. It's I don't know what the stats are on it, but I know obviously women do suffer from that imposter syndrome a lot, a lot more than what men do. It's just how we can turn that on its head, really. So,
mm.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Build
yeah,
each
I
other up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, I mean, obviously, because I'm still halfway through uni, I want to bring it back to education, but I think this empowering women to speak like men starts there.
yeah,
Because, like, in my tutorials, I finish every sentence with "I don't know." Like, I'll say my idea and I'll finish it every time, but if that makes any sense, I don't know. Because it's like you feel like you need to overcompensate with how much effort, how much work you're doing, and then you also feel like you need to
mm,
overcompensate and not seeming like you're trying to do something too high reaching or whatever. And
Mm,
yeah, so I think my final thought is we need to start encouraging these sorts of space where we work differently in education so that it
yeah,
translates into the workspace.
yeah.
yeah.
And
And let's
if
just
anyone,
celebrate uniqueness.
yeah,
I think the huge point is let's just celebrate uniqueness. Let's just celebrate, how different we all are, because, you know, if we really think about it, I think the world would be quite boring if we were all the same. So,
Mm.
you know, hugely
And
important.
if anyone ever calls you bossy, just tell them that. Are you bossy or are you showing leadership qualities?
Yes.
Oh,
And on
I'm
that
gonna
note, we're going to leave it
my
on an
On that
assertive, on a
bombshell.
confident high from a group of fabulous ladies who have amazing qualities that you bring into your workplace every single day. Thank you.